have implications for action, movement, control of objects. Finally, just as one last point that you might like to think about, is this chronostate, this temporal extension of time, is it related in any way to something else that's similar? And that is the sense of agency. The sense of agency has been studied by many people, but mainly one of the experts is Patrick Haggard in London. And the sense of agency refers to the feeling that you are in control of your own actions and you're in control of how your body interacts with the world. Sense of agency is measured experimentally by asking participants to judge whether their action caused an outcome. And you can manipulate by computer displays these days quite easily between people making an action and what they see on the screen, etc. But what's also possible to do is you can use an implicit measure. And it happens that there's a compression of perceived time between action and outcome. If you use your body to produce an outcome, you will perceive the interval between onset of movement and outcome to be shorter than it really is. Works like this. So let's hear. We have an action that causes a tone 250 milliseconds later. You can ask people to judge by looking at a rotating hand on a clock face. You can ask them to judge when they made the action occurred, if they judge action alone, so the action alone, but without any consequence, or they just perceive when a tone was given, not linked to action, and perceive this tone here. Well, that's okay. They match roughly well. And then we can have a situation where the action causes the tone to occur. In other words, without the action, the tone will not appear. So you have to do something, and then a tone will appear. It will be there. If you do that, you perceive the duration between action and tone to be shorter than it actually is. You shift your perception of the action forwards in time, and you shift your perception of when the tone occurred backwards in time. And people say this is like a perceptual binding of the action causing the tone. It's an interesting phenomenon because, of course, it doesn't happen in involuntary movements. So if you make the same action by provoking TMS, magnetic stimulation of the brain causing the same action, the twitch causes the tone, then you shift time, your perception of time, in rather different directions. Not at all the same as this binding action that you see with voluntary actions and tones. So is this linked in any way? I'm not sure, but it's yet another example of linking movement with perception. And again, what does it do to control of movements? So I'll stop there. And here are the main points I've tried to make. First of all, movement of the eyes or the arm changes our perception of time of external events, which may be linked with our perceptions of space. And together they have implications for perception of moving objects. And I've just at the end just tried to say that there are other similar effects that may share substrate or link in some way to temporal effects of movement, such as this sense of agency. So I will stop at that point, and I think we can stop sharing the screen, and I would be ready to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, John, for this wonderful presentation. I think that, well, I read some questions right on the chat. So
Yeah,
if anyone wants to
people
ask.
had some problem in hearing. Yeah, but maybe they were on Zoom, not on Zoom.
Yeah, but Fabio has one question.
Hi, John. I'm Fabio, a professor at the São Paulo State University. Thanks for your presentation. It's a good theme and very interesting. I'm wondering about the velocity of saccades and our gaze movements. What is the effect if I move my eyes faster or slower when I perform a saccade? It's important for the movement and time. Is change that relation that that lake that I perceive the time or the movement.
Yeah, well, with saccades, the velocity of the saccade is always linked to the distance of the saccade. So there's a constant relationship between velocity and distance. So which is known as the main event, main sequence. So yes, velocities are fixed according to distance moved. So it's equivalent to what I actually described, really. So when I was saying you extrapolate back to the onset of the saccade, then the amount that you add on is proportional to the distance moved. Rather than you can't change the velocity of your eye movement for a given distance. So if you make a saccade of 30 degrees, it's impossible to do it slowly or quickly. Your saccades are always the same speed. So you can't vary that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, actually, I'll just want one thing. You can vary the saccade velocity slightly by rewarding people. If you reward people, then their saccades can actually get slightly faster. But that's a very special circumstance. So sorry.
John, is there any other larger consequences for movement perception? Because we are talking about milliseconds. Is there any change of time perception, but not in case of milliseconds, but in case of seconds for any situation?
Yeah, not that I know of. But, you know, sub-second changes in time are pretty important. If you're playing sports and so on, they can be the difference between hitting a ball well and hitting the ball badly or even missing it. So all these are effects of a tenth of a second or slightly more. They are important in many circumstances, and that's obvious, really. When you experience this illusion of the stopped clock, it's really quite striking, even though it's only a short period of time that we're concerned about. You do notice it. You notice it really in a very striking manner.
But is there any way to overcome such kind of illusion? I mean,
no.
Training? No, because this is physiological.
So. Yeah, I don't think so. I think the illusion is there for a particular purpose, which is it binds together your perception of space and time so that things are constant and they appear to have been in positions when you move your eyes, etc. And even when you move your arms, which was rather more unexpected.
But is this and for the other animals, it's the time. This kind of illusion works exactly the same. Do you have an idea?
I have no idea. You could probably do some sort of similar experiments on primates. It wouldn't be impossible. People do much more difficult experiments on primates, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. I expect it is, but it'd be fascinating to know, actually. Yeah.
Because I'm asking that because if this, let's say that this is a kind of well, we had this, may say that one day we had a larger illusion like that, and then evolution also has been working in order to decrease this illusion. So, and then maybe for example, eagles do, or the animals that needs even larger visual precision to catch their prey, and the other
yeah,
thing.
I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, like I say, we haven't really investigated much of the effects of these illusions on movement itself. But as you know, sometimes your percepts are different from what happens to when you move an arm. So I'm thinking of examples where you might perceive an aperture's got smaller, but when you reach out to pick up an object, then what your hand does doesn't match what your eye sees. There are many examples of this. You know, when you get it, that you can change the percept of an object, but when you reach out to pick it up, you pick it up as if the object had not changed in the way you perceived it.
John, Daniela she's asking, how is the application for the pilots in car racing?
Yeah, I don't know, but you know, we haven't done experiments on this, and I would like to see whether or not these percepts that make you think that things have appeared at a different time than they have, or in the percepts of moving objects, you actually shift your perception of where things are in space to a small extent. These should have some sort of consequences for movement. But as I just said to you, the percept you have may not match what your motor system knows. So whether or not this is the case for these sorts of illusions, I don't know. But that, you know, if the illusion is carried through into an effect on movement, it should be detectable, even though it's quite a short period of time. So it's a fascinating question, and I'm sorry I can't answer it.
John, well, a lot of people, you know, a lot of students, they are all from physical education or sports science or from physical therapy. And for example, people from physical therapy, we have a lot of students that they are dealing with, for example, stroke. So people with neurological diseases, and do any change in this kind of change, this illusion, time illusion, when they have this neurological change?
You know, it would be a really interesting question. In fact, you know, you could imagine perhaps that stroke, maybe you get larger percepts. I'm thinking of stroke in the context of fatigue after stroke, post-stroke fatigue. I wonder whether that sort of effect might be linked, might have perceptual consequences. But again, I don't know. As far as I know, most of these experiments are all done on healthy, normal people. So it's a fascinating thought to know how they might vary between different categories of patients, or even different categories of people. You know, athletes versus non-athletes, for example.
Yes. Yeah, those questions are also, I think, that are also important, because I have also because one of the tasks students will have to do after your lecture is thinking about it and thinking about questions that they can try to answer based on your talk.
Oh, that's difficult. I should have.
So you
should have made some suggestions during my talk to help out.
But well, thinking about do you have any suggestions about what you for example, what you would like to do next?
I think you've asked me two very good ones, really, which is one is to look at some pathology to see whether these things change with disease, because you know, I look at stroke patients and I also look at patients with movement disorders, and so in both cases there may be some changes there. And then so that's the first question. The second question really is, what effect do these percepts, these changes in our perceptions, have on our movements? Do they appear in movements, or are the movements controlled separately from our perceptions? Are the two things actually divergent in some way? So yeah, those are the two, I think, most important questions. And you may ask, well, what about training? Can you train in such a way that these things change or disappear? I somehow doubt that's the case, but again, it's a nice thought experiment to persist with.
Ricardo is also asking, is saccade a constant dependent only on distance, or doesn't attention to the task at hand affect the speed?
Well, it's like I said, saccades are a little odd in that for any distance, there is just one velocity that occurs. So it's not possible. It's not like an arm movement where you can move your arm slowly or quickly. It's rather different. You could do the experiment, again, we haven't done, with arm movements. You know, we asked people to move their arms from different positions, which took them different amounts of time, but we could also have asked them to move their arm from a same distance slowly or quickly, and see whether the speed of the movement, of the arm movement, which is adjustable, changes the perception that you get of time. Again, we haven't done that. You know, at the time, I think we were just doing the fastest possible movement to make the arm movement as similar as possible to a saccade as we could. So that's another extension of the task that would actually be very simple to do.
My connection was not the. Was a little bit unstable. There is another question. Thank you. Someone asked, do you believe that time illusion related to the arm movement is the same in cyclical movements such as walking?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. And yeah, that would be equivalent to doing, say, moving your arm cyclically onto the target, off the target, onto the target, off to the target. You know, this might be a case where you might adapt in some ways your percept if you keep repeating the task. Again, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know the answers to many of these questions, but they're really interesting questions. I can just see another one. Would motor task complexity alter the perception? Again, it may do, but it may simply relate to the time taken. I would guess it would relate to the time taken to do the task rather than the complexity. I'm saying that because when we did experiments to try to dissociate movement from movement in space of the eyes versus movement of attention from one place to another, the attentional effect was zero. So changing attention doesn't change your perception of time. So maybe motor complexity in the same way, given that it involves attention, might also not make a difference to these effects. Yeah, I suppose again it's quite easy. You can make the movement more complicated, ask people to negotiate an object or something like that in order to just add a little extra time to the movement.
Oh, another question. This one is about fatigue. Is there any compensatory effect or visual or mental fatigue related, especially on attention during motor task?
Yeah, I don't know. I mentioned fatigue in relation to stroke, and sorry, I don't know the answer to this. These are great questions, and that's what you're supposed to do when you listen to a series of experiments like I've just talked to you. I don't know, but it could be. It's an interesting thought, particularly fatigue, whether that would change perception of these effects. Very interesting. Sorry, can't help, but I wish I knew the answer.
But John, if you induce fatigue for just one eye and the other eye, and then you try to do again, then can we change the percept?
I don't know, but I don't know whether it's possible to fatigue just one eye and not the other.
I don't know. Maybe doing some very
a weird thing to do. But yeah, that would be a great question. I suppose you could do a sort of people have in fact done some local anesthesia of the muscles. It's an unpleasant thing to do, but it is possible, and you could slow the eye movement down. You could probably slow the eye by with special contact lens as well to probably do with something like that. Again, I'm trying to rack my brains to think of experiments that people might have done with eye movements to do that. So there may be ways of slowing the eye movements and seeing whether that. But it comes down to the same experiment as arms. When you move the arm, you could easily, perhaps more easily, ask people to move the arm slowly or more quickly in order to touch this vibration target.
Cool. Thiago is also asking, would you say that this temporal effect would be noticeable during a visual tracking? Is most person task?
That's a good question. I don't think so, because of course with visual tracking you're maintaining the object on the retina all the time. So I can't see that being a possible experiment, unfortunately.
Another question. How does movement affect the perception of time? Is similar between?
Yeah, I don't know. Great question. I'd like to do all these experiments. I don't know.
Good. There is another. Vinicius wants to also ask you. He didn't write the question, and he wants to talk. Vinicius.
Okay, Professor. First of all, thank you for our great presentation. I was the one who asked about if you believe that time illusion related to the arm movements is the same in cyclical movements such as walking. I asked that because on my master experiment, I instructed people with Parkinson's disease to walk it with an increased arm swing amplitude and frequency.
Yeah.
And I didn't control it, but in some patients, I spent a time watching the accelerometer signal that I use to measure arm movements. And I noticed that the number of arm movements are almost the same when they increase their amplitude when they walk in unusual way. You know, that's why my doubt about this illusion related to arm movement, if they're the same on cyclical movements or they change it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I exactly understood what you were asking the patients to do. They were walking at the same rate, but they were swinging their arms over a longer distance.
Yes, I asked them to increase their arm swing amplitude.
Right.
And I noticed that the number of arm swings when they increase their amplitude are almost the same during the usual walking.
Okay, but I mean, wouldn't that be necessary because they would have to keep their arms in temporal synchrony with their legs? I mean, the legs would still. It's very difficult to move your arms out of sync with your legs when walking. So they would move their arms more quickly to achieve a higher amplitude, but they would maintain synchrony with the legs.
Yes, but I wonder if it's the same temporary, it's the same time. For example, there was just 30 seconds to do the task, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that with my instruction, they would have less cycles of the arm because they increased the amplitude and the speed. But it's not what occurred. There are almost the same number of arm swings, arm cycle swings at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think my suggestion would be that's linked to the fact that they make the same leg movements. They're walking at the same rate.
Okay.
The arms are matched to the legs. I don't know. I mean, I haven't done the experiment.
Okay. Thank you, Professor.
So is there any other questions?
I would like to ask another one, if I may.
Oh, you can. Go on, Thiago.
Yes, thank you. Professor, I was wondering, it's quite remarkable that both an arm movement and a saccade movement both lead to an alteration of the perception of time, which makes me think that this perception of time related to both movement and vision would be controlled somewhere centrally. Mm-hmm. Do you have any speculation on which brain structure or region would perhaps be responsible for this link?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Where is this happening? I think some people have postulated, without very much evidence, that it's some posterior parietal cortex, which would tend to link perception and movement together in some way. But really, I don't know. I mean, this is of course one good example of how you could use a patient experiment perhaps to look at the effect of lesions, particular brain lesions on these effects. But I can't do much better than that really myself, unless you can.
Well, not to, but
Okay. So, well, you said, John, that your studies are based on young adults. Then it looks like that sports may change the results, or doing sports may change the results. Getting older may change the results, or getting tired may change the results. What kind of change in human development may not change the results?
May not change the results. Yes, I don't know. When you were saying that, I was thinking of going from children, through adolescence up to adulthood, whether things develop then. Again, I don't know the answer to that. I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at, because I suppose other perceptions and illusions actually do change through childhood onwards. And this might be also an example of one of those.
So, and for example, because a lot of therapy, human movement sciences, they're also trying to change. They realize that perceptions is an important issue. Do you think that time perception for rehabilitation, but not for visual rehabilitation, I mean, but for motor rehabilitation is also an issue, and may in some problems that people have to move, it's not related to only the motor part of but also for this time perception problem?
Yeah, well, it comes again to the idea of fatigue, and especially chronic fatigue, and the fatigue that comes post-stroke, for example. Whether the perception of fatigue may also be linked to perception of time taken to do things. There may be some experiments on this, not linked to movement, but generally to ask whether in some of these conditions there are changes in perception of other things, perhaps time, as well as change in perception of effort, giving you fatigue. So a really interesting idea to look at.
There is another question about esports.
Oh, they have to do that.
Can you see
I
that?
don't know. Esports are a really good example, aren't they, with very, very rapid finger movements, etc. Occurring sub-second effects are really very, very important for them. And yes, it would be fascinating to know whether they can counteract the perceptual effects, or, as I've said before, maybe the perception does not match the movement control. Yeah, the two things may or may not be linked together. So, great question.
Good. Let's see if there is any other one.
Professor? Yeah. Would you say that this illusion is affected by prior experience? If I'm trying to do a well-trained movement, and then perhaps I have an internal representation of how long I should do a particular movement, or how long does it take for me to perform a particular movement, would this alter my intuition of time? Say if I'm trying to go and hit a moving object, a ball, for instance, say during volleyball or something like this. So I know that there are some changes in time. I'm probably not where the ball is not perhaps where I'm perceiving, but I have a very well-trained movement. So what would you say would be the interplay of this?
Well, I think that there may be an interplay, that perhaps it's a practice effect, that by practicing, then you can compensate for the perceptual illusion automatically, or maybe the two things are separate, as I keep saying. Maybe perception is separate from control of movement. So again, it would be interesting to look at these things in particular categories of the healthy people, athletes versus non-athletes, or particular types of athletic performance.
Thank you.
And John, for example, anticipation is something that depends on our perception of what's going to happen. And if our time perception is changed, and then we think that something has started before it really started, it might change also our anticipation.
Yeah, it might. It might. Agreed. And And again, how do we cope with this? Do we adapt? Do we adjust? Is it an automatic compensation? Don't know.
But the other thing that is quite interesting is that, for example, that I saw some papers with people with Parkinson's disease where when they do the wrong anticipation.
Yeah.
Could we say that sometimes when people do the wrong decision for anticipation is in part of caused by the wrong time perception?
Well, we've talked a number of examples of this, and I think it is possible. Because again, some of these wrong anticipations are actually, I'm thinking of gait and so on, initiation, they are sub-second changes that make a substantial difference in how a movement actually pans out. So it would be a great thing to look at, sure.
Okay. So, fellows, any other question that you would like to ask?
I would have a last one. Sorry for asking that too many questions. I was just curious about what you think about regarding the complexity of the visual stimulus. So does the time the brain takes to process the visual stimulus play a role in this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hadn't actually thought about that. You're quite right. Of course, it takes time for the brain to produce this sensation. You know, for 200-300 milliseconds. So, of course, everything is happening in the past anyway. And how that maps onto all these things, I really don't know. Maybe that delay is something that allows these changes in perception to occur. There is a lot of time in the system that is there that can be manipulated. But I don't know. It's a really interesting question, for sure.
Okay.
Well, John, I think it was this almost 1.5 hours that we were together was amazing. I think that the students, they have experienced such a great opportunity to have you. I haven't asked you before, have you been to Brazil?
I have been to Brazil once, which was a long time ago, for a conference in Rio, for the International Clinical Neurophysiology Conference.
Okay.
But that was all. Ever. That's only my only visit. So hardly at all.
Yes. Well, I think that for students, I think that's a great opportunity. Yeah. And something that I was wondering, because this is a general curiosity, this is not about your talk, but I was just reading your 10 last papers you have published this year. And I was thinking about how for me is, because every time I read a paper or I write a paper, I have not new questions. And I think that I was just thinking how many questions your mind is bubbling, because you are doing so many, you are so present in so many different studies and different directions to study the neurosciences. So thinking about now today, what is one great nice question that you should suggest to students to follow, to go?
I don't know. There's so many questions. And as you see, I can't answer most of the questions anyway. so actually, that's why I've worked in many different fields. it could be a weakness. That it is a weakness in a way not to tackle one problem and follow it all the way through. But I do have a tendency to look at find many things very interesting and have many questions about them all. So that's just the way that it happens.
Now, I don't see it as a weakness. I see it as a very nice competence you have, because you are capable to see with eyes that we don't have when you is familiar with very different fields.
Yeah.
So,
well, thanks. Luis, I'm going to have to go quite soon because I have another thing.
Yes.
Fast.
Yes. Well, John, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure
for staying with us. I know that it was a great experience for all of us, and I don't know if any of the students would like to. I would ask to the students to open their cameras in order to John be able to see you.
Oh, there you go. Oh, heck. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, it's lovely to see you.
Hi.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, that's
great.
great.
That's a lot, aren't it? Yeah. 43. Right.
Yeah. As you can see, students. And thank you, John.
Okay.
Again, and hope to see you.
So much.
And
so much.
we keep in touch.
Okay, we will, and we'll keep in touch. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave right now, but it's great to visit you.
Yes,
okay.
At least virtually.
Yeah, virtually.
And, well,
maybe
yes,
soon.
And I have a nice, yes, and I have a nice holiday next week as well.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, John. Thank you. Ok, I think that now we have finished. Eu vou passar para o português, né? Eu acho que a gente pôde aproveitar bastante, né, a fala do professor John Rothwell. Né? Eu não sei se vocês tiveram tempo, né, das pessoas que receberam o meu e-mail, tiveram tempo para fuçar na lista de publicações dele, né? Vocês viram lá o número, né? Ele só tem 1.300 artigos publicados. E a gente não dá para nem falar, mas é tudo em inglês, né? Quer dizer, o professor John, ele foi editor da Experimental Brain Research por bastante tempo. Né? Ele é um professor muito experiente, né? E vocês veem que, né, acho que o tamanho da experiência dele é proporcional ao tamanho da umidade que ele tem, né, em apresentar os assuntos e, né, em querer discutir as questões com vocês. Né? Acho que isso foi muito bacana. Né? Eu conheci o John não faz muito tempo, né? Assim, que a gente começou a conversar, etc. e tal. Né? Eu gostaria de ter conhecido ele há mais tempo. Né? Acho que para poder ter tido mais oportunidades de estar conversando com ele, de estar conhecendo mais coisas com ele. Né? Bom, como vocês viram, né, esse vai ser o esquema das disciplinas, né, assim, só que eu mandei o programa para vocês, né, a gente só teve uma alteração que o professor Major teve que pedir para ele teve um probleminha, não vai poder dar aula de amanhã, né, mas amanhã a gente, assim, nos outros dias que não vão ter os professores convidados, eu vou desenvolver alguns assuntos de biomecânica e a gente vai discutir um pouco mais sobre os tópicos centrais da parte básica de biomecânica. A ideia central, né, da disciplina é que vocês se inspirem nas palestras, né, e nessas palestras, vocês, com base na palestra, pensem numa pergunta de pesquisa e escrevam um ensaio que dê suporte a essa pergunta de pesquisa e uma forma de fazer esse projeto. Tá? Esse vai ser o objeto de avaliação, vai ser a minha forma de avaliação de vocês na disciplina. Né? E aí, é claro, eu vou fazer um certo filtro, né? Mas aí, os que realmente assim, forem, pelo menos, decentemente apresentáveis, eu vou encaminhar para os professores. né? E vou conversar com os professores, né? De repente, quem sabe, né, não rola alguma oportunidade nessas assim, de vocês tentarem concretizar esse estudo, o professor acha interessante, né? Hoje, quando a gente a palestra com o John, né, a gente discutiu várias coisas que poderiam ser, né, objeto de estudo nessa percepção do tempo. Tá? Não sei se vocês querem abrir agora, querem conversar, perguntar alguma coisa? Sim, o link vai ser sempre o mesmo. O link vai ser sempre o mesmo. Eu só não deixei público esse link, né, e eu peço para vocês não deixarem ele público, porque quando a gente deixa público, eu digo assim, põe no Facebook, alguma coisa assim, ele aumenta muito a chance de invasão, né? De um pessoal nada a ver entrar na sala e aí começar a fazer bagunça, né? Apesar
Professor,
que, por exemplo, né, como eu tenho... Oi,
eu não sei se eu perdi aqui,
abraço,
porque
Chica.
tô com alguns problemas de internet aqui, mas
Não.
esse projeto a gente tem que escrever ele em inglês, primeira pergunta. E a segunda
Sim.
pergunta é se quais são os tópicos que tem que ter ali, se é de um pré-projeto mesmo, então introdução,
É um
objetivo.
pré-projeto. A ideia é escrever uma introdução com uma proposta de método. E aí, né, uma introdução, quer dizer, uma construção de um problema, uma hipótese e um objetivo.
Ok, obrigado.
Nada, né? Então, essa que é a ideia. Tchau, Angélica. Oi.
Eu estava olhando por alto os dois livros que tinha de sugestão, né, de leitura para essa matéria, mas é óbvio que, né, infelizmente, por ser condensada, também não tem um tempo hábil de ir um pouquinho mais a fundo em nada lá, né? Aí eu que não tenho um background muito em biomecânica, seria legal se tivesse talvez alguns dos tópicos desse livro que fossem mais interessantes para conseguir para tirar mais proveito da matéria, né? Não sei se tem algum desses pontos de lá que seria interessante ver com mais detalhe.
Uma coisa que eu estou pretendendo fazer, Thiago, né? E isso vai ser principalmente nos encontros da semana que vem, né? Nos encontros da semana que vem, eu quero, nos momentos que não tiver com os professores convidados, eu quero revisitar o que foi apresentado nas aulas e discutir por exemplo, vamos pensar assim, né? Amanhã, eventualmente, pode ser que alguns de vocês, no fundo, eu não sei o que não sei o que é movimento sacádico. Então, a gente pode discutir amanhã. Eu não entendi direito o que ele falou de a diferença entre concept e percept, né? São duas coisas que ele falou hoje também. Eu não entendi direito essa coisa de que ele estava falando, sabe? Então, uma coisa que a gente vai trabalhar muito é que, caso vocês percebam, né, que tem algumas coisas que vocês escutaram na palestra, né, que vocês, puxa, não entendi isso, e isso me atrapalhou muito no meu entendimento, anota e separa, porque aí no encontro seguinte que tiver comigo, vocês colocam na mesa para a gente discutir. Né? E eu coloquei assim na lista, lá, né? Eu coloquei na lista da bibliografia para ler. São dois livros. Um livro de método de pesquisa em biomecânica, que é do grupo do professor Ramil, né? E o livro de biomecânica do David Winter. Eu não coloquei aonde está, mas eu acho que muitos de vocês devem conhecer esses lugares onde vocês fazem busca de livros em PDF. Lá tem, né? Eu não posso ficar falando, eu não posso passar isso para vocês, mas se vocês procurarem, vocês acham. Tá? Mas com certeza, Thiago. E assim, todas as dúvidas que você tiver, essas coisas que você sentir dificuldade, levanta, fala, né? Para que isso entre na agenda, para eu tentar resolver quando eu estiver comandando a aula, né? Ou no próximo encontro.
Perfeito.
Tá bom?
Obrigado.
Deixa eu comentar uma coisa com vocês, né? Que eu acho que é até importante em relação ao que o Thiago comentou, né? Quer dizer, tipicamente essa disciplina ela acontece de um jeito muito diferente do que está acontecendo agora, né? Ele acontece assim. Monique, se você quiser, manda para as pessoas por e-mail, né? Naquele e-mail combinado que eu mandei para todo mundo. É assim, essa disciplina eu pego o livro do Joe Emil, né? E aí eu vou destrinchando capítulo por capítulo da biomecânica, né? Esse é o que eu tipicamente faço nessa disciplina. Mas, né, por causa da pandemia, eu resolvi buscar uma alternativa, tentar fazer alguma coisa diferente, né? E aí, dentro dessas coisas de fazer alguma coisa diferente, né, eu resolvi, né, acionar meus contatos internacionais e perguntar se eles topariam, né, falar para a gente, né? Então, quer dizer, aproveitar essa oportunidade da gente não tá podendo sair de casa, mas a gente está aceitando com mais naturalidade, né, vamos dizer assim, as aulas remotas. Então é o momento da gente poder trazer gente de fora, né, para falar. Então acabou quase virando um mini congresso, né? No final das contas, o peso das pessoas, né, é grande, das pessoas que vêm participar, né? Quer dizer, o John Rothwell, vocês viram ele. Aí a gente tem o professor Herzog, né? Já foi, o professor Herzog, o professor Enoca, que a maior parte de vocês também deve conhecer, o professor Camille, todos eles são grandes nomes dentro da Sociedade Internacional de Biomecânica. Eu não tenho certeza se o Enoca já foi presidente da Sociedade Internacional de Biomecânica. Se o Enoca já foi presidente da Americana, né? O Antônio Stecco é um dos nomes que está mais aparecendo, né, agora em assuntos emergentes de biomecânica, né, que é a fáscia, né? Talvez um pouco menos conhecido seja o professor Heiko Wagner, que é da Alemanha, mas ele vai mostrar, né, eles estão trabalhando no desenvolvimento de um sistema que é análogo ao OpenSim, né, a esses sistemas de cálculo de forças internas, e que permite a gente entender toda a mecânica interna do corpo humano, né? Então, acho que vai ser uma experiência muito interessante para vocês. Vocês vão ter contato com grandes nomes da biomecânica, né? Assim, acho que nem quando eu organizei o Congresso Brasileiro de Biomecânica, eu não consegui juntar uma quantidade tão pesada de nomes importantes de uma vez só. Acho que vai ser uma experiência bem legal para vocês, tá? Eu mando para você o e-mail, aí Monique, aí você pode redirecionar para as pessoas. Alguém quer fazer alguma outra pergunta? Né? É assim, essa disciplina ela vai acontecer principalmente em inglês. Agora eu resolvi falar em português porque pelo menos o que eu entendi, porque a gente vai ter os convidados do exterior também da Europa participando, né? Então, mas agora é mais para dar recados, informações, então tudo bem. Mas a gente o objetivo também da disciplina estar em inglês é um pouco para treinar o inglês de vocês, né, e desenferrujar um pouco, né, vocês do inglês. Acho que é uma coisa legal. E como todo o material vai ficar, assim, a gente teve um problema na hora de transmitir a aula pelo YouTube, mas todas as aulas vão ficar lá gravadas no YouTube, né? E eu vou estar depois, o que não tiver gravado na hora, depois eu vou subir, deixar lá online para vocês assistirem, né? Então, às vezes, tem coisa que vocês não entendem na hora, né? Mas daí assiste o vídeo, volta um pouquinho, assiste de novo e vai andando, tá? Amanhã eu vou aproveitar, né? Assim, eu vou pegar os capítulos iniciais, o 1, 2 e o 3, do livro do Joe Emil sobre biomecânica, e vou comentar um pouco sobre ele, né? Falar um pouco de cinemática tridimensional e bidimensional e tridimensional, né? Eu acho que isso vai ajudar a facilitar bastante, né, a vinda dos próximos tópicos. Não deu para fazer isso agora com o professor John, porque o John a gente estava organizado para ele falar na segunda-feira que vem. Mas aí o que aconteceu é que, na verdade, na segunda-feira que vem, lá no Reino Unido, é feriado, e ele já tinha combinado de viajar com a esposa dele, né? Então, aí por isso que teve que inverter, já começou a disciplina acelerado, né, com o John falando. Mas foi por causa disso. Bom, alguém quer perguntar mais alguma coisa? E assim, deixa eu falar uma outra coisa importante, né? Oficialmente, a disciplina vai acontecer a disciplina está marcada lá das 2 às 6, né? Das 2 às 6. Mas eu não vou castigar vocês com 4 horas, né, de atividade remota, que isso é bem cansativo. Né? Então, eu tenho conversado com os professores e pedido para eles darem palestras de 1 hora e meia no máximo, né? Mais 30 minutos de discussão. Então, eu acredito que se a gente somar sempre em torno de 2 horas, não vai pegar muito, assim, a gente não vai chegar até 6 horas. Né? Acho que uma coisa que eu particularmente tenho aprendido, né, com as aulas remotas, né, porque no começo eu confesso que eu, às vezes talvez exagerasse e ficasse 4 horas com os alunos, eu acho que isso é bem cansativo. Né? Ainda mais que a gente for trabalhar numa disciplina dessas intensas, né, de 2 semanas. Então vai cansar muito vocês se a gente ficar lá 4 horas no vídeo todo dia. Né? Então, para trabalhar para a capacidade de atenção de vocês se mantenha, né, na melhor posição possível, né? A gente vai estar trabalhando com em torno de 1 hora e meia, 2 horas no máximo. Tá bom? Alguma pergunta? Não?
Não, tranquilo, Mochi.
Bom, legal. Bom, então acho que se ninguém tiver mais perguntas, né, por hoje
Professor,
a gente já encerra. Oi, fala.
Então, para amanhã, a tarefa
Fala.
é formular a pergunta, né, baseada na palestra do professor de hoje.
Essa vai ser a tarefa do final da disciplina.
Da disciplina.
Né? Então, vocês vão ter que escolher uma das palestras. Vocês vão ter que escolher uma das 6 palestras para montar isso. Né?
Perfeito.
Tá bom?
Perfeito.
Ok. Então, tá legal, pessoal. Obrigado também, Rô. Obrigado, Arnaldo.
Muito obrigada.
Valeu, Mochi. Obrigado pela ajuda aí.
Valeu, obrigada. Aí é super especial você poder ter, na verdade, organizado, né, esse curso para a gente e ter palestras com grandes nomes aí da biomecânica e palestras totalmente exclusivas, né? Super. Me sinto muito honrada de fazer parte desse curso.
Obrigado, Alessandra. Obrigado. Espero que você aproveite bastante.
Eu também.
Douglas, Ariane, Dani, né? Faz tempo que eu não via vocês também, né? Bom, obrigado, pessoal, né? A gente só está no início da jornada, né? Espero que todo mundo aproveite, né? Espero que você... e eu tenho uma outra coisa que é muito importante, né? Eu comentar com vocês. Os professores que eu convidei, né? São todos altamente simpáticos, né? Para conversar, né? Então, que vocês percam, né? A vergonha de falar, né? E converse com os professores. Né? E não tem problema se o nosso inglês de vocês está no The Books on the Table. Né? Eles sabem menos português do que a gente. Né? Então, eles compreendem muito bem. Né? E eles têm um espírito colaborativo muito grande. Né? Então, eu acho que sintam-se, né, incentivados a perguntar. Sintam-se incentivados a perguntar. Né? Eu acho que isso é uma coisa que, né, é importante. Tá bom?
Tá ótimo.
Legal, pessoal. Então eu vejo vocês amanhã, 2 horas, tá?
Tá bom.
Abraço para todo mundo, fiquem bem, né? Cuidem-se, né? Até amanhã. Tchau, tchau.
Até.